Hello, welcome to another edition of Backstage. My next guest is one of the most passionate people I think I've ever met. Whenever you're at the tour and you're feeling a bit flat, if Dr. Dave walked in the room after 10 minutes, you're ready to just about walk through a brick wall. He's got an amazing background. He was with the AIS and Cycling Australia for over 20 years. He's a sports scientist. He also worked for the Philadelphia 76ers for 4 years. He was the Director of Performance Research and Development, and he's currently the Professor of Exercise Science at the Australian Catholic University and also the Chief Scientist and Director of Performance for Aperion Life in San Fran. Dr. Dave, welcome, mate. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you holding up at the moment with this whole global pandemic?
I'm doing good. I'm surprised that you're able to track me down. It's been a little bit since we've caught up. And when you reached out, I was, bunkered into my garage. And right now we've had that really weird situation where we were on full lockdown and quarantined to the home. The whole city was down. The Bay Area was down. And then it opened up and everybody started feeling like, whew, we got through that. And then the numbers of people dying started increasing. They got up to 8 to 10 deaths an hour in California, which is insanity. And then a whole number of counties in California, we're locked down again.
Are you keeping abreast to developments with this vaccine and so forth? Because we're getting reports that sounds like they're pretty close with Oxford University, and they might be shipping it out in September or whatever, but no one really knows. And then you hear Russia have got one and it's all ready to go, but they sort of skip the queue a bit. Do you know really much what's going on at the moment?
No, I follow it because the clients that I am involved with now, they're investors, they're VCs, they're very tech savvy, and so you get to hear bits and pieces that's unofficial, and then you get to hear all the stuff that's on news, which is a little bit more like entertainment. I follow a couple journals and try to keep up with some articles, and have a couple medical doctors that I keep in touch with. And the message that I'm feeling comfortable with is that it's going to take a while before a suitable vaccine is ready and available. And even when it is, it's going to be a while before it's available for all of us for it to roll out. And even when it is available, it's not going to work for everybody in all cases. So I think I like to be an optimistic guy, but I think as it pertains to sport and as it pertains for all of us that work around sport, I think it's going to be the future is going to be different. And even when that vaccine comes out, I think we're looking at, 6 months to a year or more versus like the next 2 to 3 months.
Now, I briefly went over some of the things you did at the top of the show. Do you want to give listeners a bit of an overall background to what is it that you do? Because I think there's so much more to the title as sports scientist. You're a bit of a mentor for a lot of athletes, and there's a lot of stuff that's in there that you do that isn't in your title.
Yeah, no, I could give you the quick rundown. I was a collegiate cross-country skier and downhill skier, and that was kind of paying for tuition. So it was a small liberal arts college in Idaho. And I actually, as part of that study, I wasn't sure where I was going to go or what I was going to do. I knew I loved sport, and my whole family was quite sporty. I had a chance to go to Australia. This is as an undergrad, and there's a research station on Heron Island. And I thought studying in Australia for a semester would be really cool, but the only way to go is if you were a biology major. And so that was my junior year, and I declared biology as a major, and I became more entrenched in research in the scientific process and collecting data. We were studying chaetodonts, these little butterfly fish, and sea turtles out on Heron Island. And I learned about 4X beer, and I learned about beautiful sunsets, and we had a great research group. And I just fell in love with science. I just thought it was such an interesting way to go. But I knew biology wasn't going to be my calling. I took a class in exercise physiology. That's where I got really excited about exercise physiology, how the human body responds to exercise. And as an athlete, I found that super interesting. So I went and did a master's degree right in exercise physiology, working with cross-country skiers. That led to 2 years at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. That's where I met Charlie Walsh, and some of the Australian track cyclists were coming over in those days. That's where I met Lance Armstrong. He was a junior in those days. And so I started to become a lot more connected with cycling. I had a chance to do my PhD at University of Wyoming, studying different aspects of fatigue and how hormones like testosterone and cortisol and catecholamines, how they change when you get tired. So I was really interested in persistent fatigue and altitude training. And a job came up at the Institute of Sport, and a guy named Dick Telford said they had a new coach named Heiko Salzwiedel. I couldn't even say his name. And they were going to start a road program, and I could work with Neil Craig and Charlie Walsh and all these people I'd read about. And I'd heard of the AIS, and that, it was a legendary place even in the 90s. So I went over, and a lot of my work there was as a sports scientist, altitude, heat, training programs, power monitoring, those kind of themes. I think after 2000, Neil Craig left. He wanted to go into footy. And so the job opened up to be the sports science coordinator for Cycling Australia. And I was lucky enough to get that job. And then you're really networked with the high performance team with Michael Flynn and Kevin Tabata and, Paul Brosnan, and all those names kind of came into the fold. Shane Bannon, larger than life, which is how you and I met. And so things were just swimming along normally there. Again, all high performance teams, like your question of, what is it that you do? From the very beginning, it's been about asking questions and questioning answers all around this concept of what can the human body do. So that led to a headhunting group, and we can get into this later, with the Sixers. They had a new show in town. It was a terrible team, the Sixers. They were going to change everything, new owners, new coach, everything was going to be new. And they wanted to bring an Australian approach, a high performance team sport approach to the NBA. So I got to become one of the first kind of directors of performance in the NBA. And through that job, then, you're looking at these professional athletes, which is we'll talk about it later. It's a little bit of a different game. And that led to me meeting a very interesting venture capitalist who was tied in with Golden State Warriors, doing a lot of really cool technology work for the U.S. Olympic Committee. And he told me about a small startup company where he was trying to bring a high performance support model that's used in sport. He was trying to bring it to these elite executives, the Apple, Google, Tesla, all these guys who are under really heavy demands, and they want to take care of their bodies, and they can afford really good care. So that the question's always been the same. It's like, for the time you have to invest, what should you be doing? And how do you get your body to work for you in the best way possible?
It's obviously changed a lot from those early days. Like, I remember, talking to a few of the riders that went through that late 90s, early 2000 era. There was a lot of massive days on the bike, like you're talking 300K rides and just smashing themselves to get ready. That's obviously evolved a lot to modern sports scientists. What are some of the biggest changes you saw in that time?
Yeah, I think, early on, there were, to Australia's credit, there were programs that were being leaked from Europe. So you could see how the Russians, and particularly how the Germans, and how other successful nations, you could see how they were training. You couldn't see the other things they might be doing, and I'm saying that vaguely, where that could go. But you could see how they trained. And so the idea was, hey, if we know how much the Germans are training and we know how many medals they're winning, if we just trained more, then odds are maybe you'd start to go faster. And so there was a lot about Australia's just got to be harder and more focused than any other country in the world. And I think what shifted over the years was Australia has to be smarter. It has to be more clever. It has to think about timing. It has to think about the type of athletes they invest in. They've got to think about, the gains that come from equipment and aerodynamics. And so it's, Australia truly as the clever nation versus Australia just as the badass, beat the hell out of it, do more than anyone else is willing to do. I do think that was a transition.
Do you feel that at times, particularly when you were at the AIS, that we become too obsessed with gold medals in Australia? Like it's all around the Olympics, and if you don't get a gold, well, the whole thing's been a failure. And sometimes, as you know, in sport, shit happens.
Yeah.
Did you feel that obsession put probably a little too much pressure on everyone there at times?
It could have, and it's really fun to go back through the early archives of the Australian Institute of Sport. Greg Blood, if you ever get a chance to follow him on Twitter, he's like a historian. He was a librarian at Australian Institute of Sport for well over 2 decades, and he has been able to, show me and others some of the early documents that were used when they were building up the Australian Institute of Sport. And a lot of them were not about gold medals. It's funny because everybody tells a story about Montreal and no gold medals and, the nation's embarrassed and we need a center of excellence, and the Australian Institute of Sport was born. But when you talk to some of those early pioneers, they talked about things like a center of excellence and a pioneer for learning and a center point for idea exchanges and a landing pad for international experts. And I remember talking to Professor Alan Hahn, I was like, wow, you guys are so visionary. You didn't just obsess over gold. It was all about being excellent and all about learning and all about being collaborative and putting Australia, which is so far away from the rest of the world, on the map. And Alan told me, he said, that wasn't because we were that visionary. He goes, we just didn't think we could actually win much. So we wanted to cover our bets and make sure that, we were ticking other boxes as well. But you're right, a lot of those kind of altruistic themes and those things that make your heart feel warm about the Institute of Sport, the whole narrative changed over years, and you would have felt it as well. Win or go home. Gold is winning, and silver is losing. And there were some definite shifts as well. And the media propagated that, and ministers for sport propagated that, and probably directors from the Institute of Sport propagated that. So it was a shift. I think you're right.
Was one of the biggest challenges when you're at the AIS, if you'd have like an idea, like thinking outside of the box, pushing that to go, well, let's just give it a crack, rather than sort of, hey, hang on, is this tried and tested? Was that always a bit of a battle?
It's really interesting, if you talk to some of those early pioneers at the Australian Institute of Sport, and I have a lot of time for Alan Hahn and Dick Telford, Louise Burke, Craig Purdom, Peter Fricker. There's a bunch of just real legendary pioneers that a lot of us in the second wave kind of tip our hat to. And they were very entrepreneurial on how they would get funding. And, whether it was from Kellogg's, from a cereal company, whether it was, through university grants, whether it was through cooperative research centers, they had a knack of just getting resources. And so it would happen, instead of the idea leading what resources you got, you'd look for opportunities to find resources. Funding camps costs money, it costs money to feed athletes. It costs money for athletes to travel. So you need money, and coaches aren't going to give up their budgets, which are barely enough to cope. So what the research ideas and the real innovative projects, a lot of times they were born out of a scientist becoming very entrepreneurial on how they brought funding together. Then they would pay for camps and say, well, we're doing this camp, we'll need to take your blood before, during, and after to see how your blood responds while we're up at altitude. And so all of the competitors to Australia would probably have thought, wow, aren't those Australian Institute of Sport scientists are so visionary and strategic, because they're going after altitude training. But in fact, we could see there was funding for altitude training, and then we would start to partner with the coaches to make it work, both from a scientific perspective on how could your understanding help you win, but also from a real pragmatic perspective of how do these dollars help the science, but also help the athletes in the program. So it wasn't like a think tank where you might picture in the military 10 Einsteins sitting around a table with a whiteboard saying, aha, I've got it, we should study this. and then going to try to get support for it. It was more like, hey guys, come together. I just heard you could probably get $30,000 to $40,000 from Derry, Australia, if we study calcium and high intensity exercise. How about if we work this into a camp?
We talk about the commercial side of things. I reckon AIS helped sell a lot of boxes of Kellogg's Sustain.
Yeah.
That, if you had a cereal like that, bang, you on your way to getting a gold medal for sure.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about one of those camps. I remember there's a famous one in 2012, I think it was. I come over and did some filming with you with the women's camp. Do you want to give us the story of that and what effect that had on the program?
Yeah, so it was a really interesting story, I think, and they were really fun camps. What happened, which was really sad, you'd remember it, most of Australian cycling does, when Amy Gillett was killed and the whole women's national team was wiped out over when they were getting ready for the Thüringen tour over in Germany. And, Australia is a small country, and when you have a car accident and one woman's dead and all the other women are wiped out, it really takes its toll. So you might have remembered before that time, there were glory days, Sarah Kerrigan, first event, 2004, gold, Anna Wilson going to World Cups with her, win, number one in the world. I mean, it was insane. They were going 1, 2, 3 in the Commonwealth Games. It was like Australia was just a whole world ahead of a lot of the other competitors. So then you wipe the national team out. And what happened is we kind of got, I think, too smart for our own good. We had a lot of lab data, and Warren McDonald was the coach at the time. And we thought, maybe the training camps we're doing are a bit too hard. Maybe we should just do a VO2 max test in the lab. We could pick them by numbers. We know their body comp, their watts per kg, their VO2 max, So we'll kind of just pick talented, physiologically capable women, and we'll name them to these teams, and they'll go over to Europe. And it was weird. It was like they were fit, but they weren't fast. It was like they're fit, but they weren't ferocious. It was like almost sanitized. There was something off. And we started to realize that the way the women used to make the team was hard. It was really hard. And that probably gave them a lot of confidence. So we were talking about how could we work with, how could we work in ways with these women to give them more confidence. And so I had a neighbor who is in defense, who is a fighter pilot, and we started talking about selection camps for special forces. So I went up to 2 Commando Regiment. I went over and saw the SAS boys over in Perth, and I kind of saw some of their selection camps. I was like, we could probably use a lot of the same structure, but girls don't need to crawl under barbed wire, carry a rucksack 40K. We don't need to do army drills to make them hard, which is where a lot of people go. What we can do is we'll keep it completely cycling and completely relevant to cycling. But what we'll do is we will put very specific challenges together, and we will run it like a special forces selection course. And what we will do is we will deselect women partway through it, just like you would. We'll give them numbers. We'll tell them it's not personal. We'll make it really hard in really relevant ways. And one of the stars out of one of the early camps was Gracie Elvin. She was a mountain biker, so they weren't going to invite her to the camp, but a slot opened up, and we thought, just for numbers, well, she's local, just throw her in. And the harder it got, the better she got. And it wasn't like she was good in things that were esoteric or weird, like a VO2 max test or some stupid blood test or genetic test. She was good when we took them on long rides, and there were, hill challenges and time trials and criteriums with boys. And she just showed she was tough as nails. And so that's what the camp was all about, giving these women a chance to experience relevant challenges. But we really did them up. I mean, you were there filming them. We brought in special forces boys, and we made them tough and relevant. They could always quit. They were voluntary camps, so we paid for them through research funds. But it was a way for them to show selectors how good they were.
Simple question. What is it that separates the really good athletes, do you think, to the ones that are middle of the pack, sort of, to say?
Yeah, I've got one for you that I don't think a lot of people talk about. and see what you think of this, because you've been around a lot of elite athletes. And I could give you an example in basketball, what I'm going to tell you. And it's this this concept of satisfaction, that I'm satisfied, like with my bank account, how much money I have there. I'm satisfied with my body composition. In the basketball, it's like I'm satisfied shooting, 30% from the 3-point line, and I'm satisfied with the top 3 plays. And then you get people like Anna Wilson, like Anna Mears, you get people like Matt Heyman. You get these people that are, like Cadell, they're just not satisfied. In fact, second is still just pissing the crap out of them. They really are just not satisfied. And when you find people whose satisfaction eludes their reality, they tend to be incredibly driven. So I don't know. I feel like there's something there. We call it competitiveness. We call it grit. We call it mental toughness. There's a bunch of names, but if you all had to boil it down, I think it's a great question. I think it's like some people are just satisfied really easy. Like, I'm fine,
Well, one of the biggest docos this year and will be for the next decade is The Last Dance. Did that give you a bit more insight into like the mindset of like a Michael Jordan? And as you said, was never satisfied and would use anything to get himself pissed off and battle ready, for finals and things like that.
Yeah, he'd even didn't you love it? Yeah, I got to watch it. And I wish I would have seen it before I started working in the NBA, because, there were some players that I got to work with and I thought, man, these guys are tricky. I mean, you've been around all the guys I've been around and all the women I've been around that are elite athletes. And there's a lot of them that are very, they're hard to work with. They're emotional. They're accusatory in a lot of things. They're really pedantic, and they're perfectionist, and they're hard to be around at times. You're just like, dude, you got to chill out. Okay. Like, I'm sorry, we didn't bring that seat cover, or I'm sorry, that didn't work out like you want. And so you could see, how would you like to work with Dennis Rodman?
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, how good was he as an athlete, and how tricky would it have been? I've met, Steve Kerr, and nice guy, coach of Golden State Warriors. And how about just getting to a point in practice where you full on punch Michael Jordan, in the face? So everybody that, thinks, oh, I want an elite team and I want them to be mild mannered and on time and respectful and easy for me to coach. I think what that show, The Last Dance, shows you is that, you're not, like, I think Ian McKenzie told me once, we're not running tours for choir boys. These guys are alpha males, and they're super competitive, and everything you want out of them and love about them, you've got to put that on the front foot. And then all of the things that frustrate you, you got to kind of put that on the back foot to see how to create environments that are the best for them to do what they're great at. Because the people that are helping them, we might be a bit unique, but they're the money winners.
Is that the hardest thing with sports scientists, is the fact that a lot of the things that you develop, you've got the variables of every athlete's different, and every athlete would react differently to the things that, or your research shows should work? Yeah.
And what you'll find with the really good sports scientists, and you've been around a lot of them, a lot of the PhD students we brought into cycling, you've been around Quaddy, and Scott Gardner, and Laura Garvican, Tammy Ebert, Paolo Minespa, Eric Hackinson, Jason Bartram, like Nick Flagler. They're good thinkers, really, really good thinkers. And they are guided and influenced by research data, which keeps them, I think, honest and realistic. But at the same time, they know how to connect with the athlete when they need it. So they're not, research says your warm-up has to be 10 minutes. They can say, hey, research has shown you can get a good warm up in 10 minutes. I can see you want to go longer. Let's just make sure we don't overdo it. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that know that you've covered your base in 10 and we can go from there. So yeah, it's one thing to know what to say, and then it's another to know when to say it and how to say it. And what's really sad, I guess, is, and you've probably seen it, there's really smart people that know so much, and their timing and the manner within which they explain something is irritating. And it doesn't feel like you want to connect with it. And you would have known, I think you ran into the late, Aldo Sassi. What a great man. And he just had a wonderful way of not just knowing what to say, but his timing and the way he said it. You could just see the athletes just connect with him and warm to him and buy in big time. So yeah, keeping that connection between what the research says and then the individual nature of high performance sport that's a real challenge.
Before we get to the 76ers and how that all came about, looking back at your time at the AIS, what are you most proud of, do you think?
The people that we just named. I think there was a real sense, especially in cycling. I don't know if they had it as much in swimming, or if they had it as much as in track and field, or in the soccer team. But one thing that cycling did incredibly well that I'll always remember, and I keep it in in my back pocket whenever I'm doing high performance work, is this idea of being you kind of are a custodian to the job, that there were people that had it before you and there'll be people that have it after you, and so it's yours for this time being. And so what you need to do while you do your job is you need to start grooming and connecting and searching for the next people that are going to take your job or grow your job. And I think that Cycling Australia did that really well. And what I'm probably most proud of is that the effort that we took, to find each and every one of those PhD students. We didn't take any one of them for granted. All of them were rigorously evaluated and discussed and mentored and brought into the program with the thought that you're special, you're going to do great things. And, when you start getting really good, people like me, people like Neil Craig, people will move out to give you space to breathe and grow. And in elite sport, then what you get is you get this kind of the sequence of care. It keeps growing. You get legacy, and you get decade to decade to decade growth. So it feels a lot more like a family grown company, versus what happens in elite sport a lot is just, you're fired, we start over. You're fired, we start over. And so you don't get any legacy, and everyone's got their idea, and then someone else has got their idea. And it's all good at the beginning, but then people get burned out and tired. And when you have the legacy, the old guys like me now, you sit around the campfire and you tell the young blokes the stories about, what happened and how good they got it now and where they're going to take it.
So, yeah, tell me about the journey to the 76ers, because it's a pretty amazing story how it all came about.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I went to the Sixers in 2015, so right before Rio de Janeiro, and I had been watching that the AIS. They take different directions, and you get new leadership up at the board. With John Wiley starting to make some moves on how he saw the Institute of Sport, how it was going to be. Some of the research funds that we had used were not available for projects as we kind of knew them. We had a lot of growth coming up under cycling, and I was finding myself really interested in kind of innovative and entrepreneurial projects. Like I'd done that skeleton program. I really found that interesting. We'd done a talent ID project in cycling. I found that really interesting. And I just started this combat center, and it was more engagement with the special forces community. And I was really, liking that. But I could tell that, the only way for some of the people that I was working with, to grow would be to get on board with another project. And so I wasn't looking hard. But a headhunting group, and this happens when you're at the Institute of Sport, everyone worldwide thinks Australian sports scientists are amazing. And I've said at conferences, people ask, why are Australian sports scientists so amazing? And I answer often that they're amazing because you think they're amazing. that's a good start. Like, you all think we're amazing. So that's better than coming from America where you think that you can't trust them. So I had this headhunting group, and they said, there's an NBA team. It's got these very wealthy owners, both of them billionaires with a bigger group, including Will Smith. These guys want to do it all. They got a new coach, Brett Brown. His wife's Australian. He's coached the Olympic team. They have a new general manager. He's very smart, MBA out of Stanford. He's worked with Daryl Morey and the Houston Rockets. He's a brainiac. He's super smart, super nice guy, very innovative with his thinking. And you could have a very healthy budget. We're going to build a new building. We're going to bring in all these superstars, and you could build the team that supports the team. And you can pretty much do whatever you need to do. And so it was kind of like, I kind of think I'm ready for that, like, instead of writing a grant for $5,000 from the Australian Sports Commission, it was like, this would really, really be exciting, So I talked to my wife. My boys were just going into high school, and we'd always thought, because I'm obviously from the US, my wife's from the US, and although we'd spent 21 years in Australia, our boys, born and raised in Australia, they have cousins from the US, and they always thought it'd be fun to do a year or two in a US school. So I was going to come and work. My contract was structured so after 2 years, I could let the AIS kind of settle down a little bit. And I would go work in the NBA for 2 years. I'd build the team, and then I'd come back, to the AIS with all these new ideas. At that time, it was there, 2 years later, the AIS still had a lot of, things. Matt Favier actually was just leaving. People I knew in higher places were leaving. So I just did not know the direction. I didn't know where it was going. So I decided to stay and, cut my ties with the AIS and stay for another 2 years and kind of finish out this 4-year build and then reassess from there. So I kind of had to jump. I was tethered, to the plane, having fun, knowing I had a backup job, which is a great way to work in the NBA. But after 2 years, then I was like, okay, I've jumped. I got one parachute, I got one pull. I got to make this work. So that's how it started. And then how's that? Like the first major draft pick after I came in, after Joel Embiid, was Ben Simmons. I was at camps at the AIS when Ben Simmons was there. I couldn't believe it, And Ben Simmons' brother went to Darramullen, which is where my boys went to school. And Ben was at the daycare center at the AIS, and his dad played basketball and coached at St. Eddie's, and it's unbelievable. Yeah.
So what was your first impressions like at the 76ers? Because obviously basketball's huge back here. Was it everything that you thought it was going to be?
Well, no, in some ways it's really, in some ways it seems really awkward and not very thoughtful. And in other ways, it's very sophisticated. So it's very tribal in nature. And you've been around team sport. Every team has its own culture and its own tribe. And the Sixers were in this kind of rebuild, the process, which was this very elaborate rebuild. There's actually a book about it that's out called Tanking to the Top. And there's some really interesting perspectives on what Sam was trying to do. He was really interested in patiently pursuing excellence. So his theme to me and his theme to all of us was people can rush because the fans don't give you much time. 2 losing years and a lot of people get fired. And it was like, if you could just be patient, you could build a team in a very thoughtful way, and you can get a lot of very interesting draft picks, and you can build up a real superpower in the NBA. So from that idea, it was very sophisticated, and the analysts that Sam worked with were very smart, very good computer scientists, very good analysts, people that could get a job, with Goldman Sachs or any big finance firm. Like, they can pay decent salaries, so they get very top-notch analysts that have great software and good insights. But then there'd be other things that you just look at and think, you got to be kidding me. I remember Craig Bellamy coming over, and we show a lot of people around, and they'd be like, "How is that? How you warm up for a game? Is that how you debrief? Is that how they're fed? Is that And it would seem like in a very structured, organized Australian footy team, you might see things that seem more superior, more scientific, and more organized, even with the monitoring and even with just how formulaic some things become. So it was both. In certain things, when it comes to media and broadcasting, and oh my God, in your area, you've seen it. They're phenomenal, aren't they?
Yeah, the access that they get in the locker rooms and that, I mean, that's unheard of.
Oh.
You might get one or two radio guys in the AFL rooms or a roaming Brian or whatever, but not to the level that. And it's just the expectation, like this is part of your job.
Yeah. No, they sell it hard. They'll do one interview with you. Stuff come out on. There's tweets that come out, Instagram stuff that comes out. There'll be a YouTube clip that comes out. There'll be a couple, ESPN stories with some quotes that come out. Everything is very thoughtful and strategic. They have media directors, and so they work with their video team. What you did for Green Edge, they'd have a staff of 6 to 8 people, and that's full time, just cutting, filming, talking, interviewing, and just packaging up all the content that comes from these professional teams. So in some of those areas, they're just amazing.
How much does money affect the mindset of a lot of these athletes? Because some of the players, the contracts are eye-watering. You're talking about Ben Simmons. I mean, he's cut one of the biggest. Well, it is the biggest Aussie athlete deal in the history of sport. How does that affect the mindset? Does that add more pressure, or these guys just is what it is? Because there's been documentaries about the associated families all wanting a slice of the pie, and everyone comes out of the woodwork. How do a lot of these athletes react to these big contracts?
Yeah, well, they definitely park in a different place than I park. So the Ferraris and all of those cars go in one area, and then the staff go in another area. But when you're doing the day job, I don't think I feel the difference. I wouldn't feel the difference, from the professionalism that you would see, from a Matthew Heyman, or a Michael Matthews. They're focused and organized and disciplined, and you don't feel the money there at all. Where you probably feel the money is that it's where sport becomes entertainment, and entertainment becomes cash flow. So you really feel it, like in the Olympics. It's about, is it a world record? Is it a personal best? Is it meeting an international standard? And so it's this idea of performance excellence really reigns supreme. But a lot of the decisions, that get made when you're working in professional sport, these guys are like small businesses that are making $20 million a year. You imagine a business making $20 million a year. That's profit. That's all expenses covered. That's your profit. So the agents and the financial advisors and those that are tied into that business, which is that player, like Ben or like Joel or whoever they are, they can't just make a decision based on performance. It has to be a decision based on the career and the earning potential and the business that this guy is running. And so you'll feel that, you can feel that. There are times where, it might be good for a player not to overdo it with a knee that's a little off. But, if it's a nationally televised game and they've got new shoes on their feet, and, then you've got to play that card as well. That's what's paying the bills. So you feel that a little bit more. I'm sure they feel it in pro sport in Australia as well, but I think you really feel it. The other thing that happens is when they're super, super popular athletes, everybody wants to get a piece of them. So you'll see, like, as I'm talking to you, I don't say much at all. I don't say really anything at all about the athletes that I worked with. And that's just out of respect for who they are and what their brand is. You never know if you might be saying something that is giving 4 journalists that are going to follow this Dan Jones podcast because someone who used to work at the Sixers might be saying something juicy right before the playoffs, and we could pick this up and run a story. And they could, you know. So you got to be particularly careful when you're working around them, and that's very different than when you're working around Olympic athletes. You're actually trying to showcase them. You're like, let me help you. Somebody wanted to know, what's Cadell Evans like? You know, I said some great things. You're trying to help them get publicity, whereas in the NBA, you let the pros deal with the publicity.
Do you find, because obviously even with my job, it was all about trust and forming relationships and just getting them to know that, okay, like what you said then, you're not going to say anything that's going to come out and be detrimental to their brand. Is it hard to win that trust after a period of time? Are they a lot more guarded because of how big a superstars these guys are?
Yeah, no, trust is huge. And I think Australia was really good for me because I think that we were, as support staff, I think it's just the Australian way, is if you're going to work with a team, you could have done your job a bunch of different ways, Dan, you know, but you were all in. Like, you were all in. It was like your whole life. You were as committed to the team as the riders were to the team. And you saw that in, you know, we know some of the other staff. Shane's all in, Kevin's all in, Quaddy's all in. Like, they're all in. And it's not about big noting yourself, because if you do, whether it's Australian tall poppy, whatever, it's just not cool. You just don't do it. So if you go to a conference and you get a chance to talk about what you did with, you know, a team that won something, you find yourself talking about the science and talking about your colleagues and talking about the opportunities, and it has a little bit more of a humble tone to it. And I think that helps you build trust. Once you know that you're there to help the player, I did an interview once when I first got to Philly, and it was a radio interview, and the guy said, so how would you define your job? And I said, I would basically define my job right now as the head helper. We're here to help these people, and I'm the head helper. So that's basically the job. And once they hear you say that on radio, and if you walk the walk, don't just talk the talk, and you're there for them if they get hurt and they wake up from a surgery, and you are there and you care, and you talk to their parents and you talk to their agent, and you don't let the team bully you around too much. You say, always remember, you know, first and foremost, it's the health and well-being of this player and then their performance capabilities now, but in the long run as well. So let's do what's right for them. If you can do that consistently, then they should trust you because you're trustworthy.
And you're a bloody good bloke, Dave. So that should go a long way. Now, I actually was fortunate enough to come over and see you and the facilities at the time in 2015, which were the temporary ones. What were the brand new facilities like? What were some of the things that you implemented there?
Oh, you would have loved it, because those mean shots you were taking in the first facility.
I couldn't believe how hard it was. The rings are so stiff. Every shot, the ball just zinged off. I thought, nah, never would have made the NBA.
All in those stiff rings. Rings. Well, what we were doing, the first place that the Sixers were at, you know, they're probably saving some money. They didn't have a facility. The college scene had much better facilities, and some of the other teams had much better facilities. But what the ownership supported building was one of the biggest footprints in the NBA, and it's a really cool facility. It's got natural light. It's got a beautifully sprung floor. It's got 2 basketball courts side by side. And what they let me do was we instrumented it. So every shot you take in the facility can be tracked. They know where it came from, and they know how close to the center of the basket it actually was when it went in, or if you missed, how far off you missed. It knows the arc of the shot. You can look at the release point. You can track all the players as they move up and down the court. You know, we copied a lot of stuff, you know, from the Australian Institute of Sport. If you see the recovery center at the Sixers facility, they have a great sports scientist that helped work with me. We brought over Shona Holson, who's formerly, you know, helped a lot of the cyclists out. She came over, and it's like a smaller version that suits 15 players. of a recovery center that looks a lot like the AIS. There, the gym is open and instrumented. We were able to just put in a lot of surveillance tech, but not make it look all geeky and sciencey. Philly's hard, it's rocky. It's like, carrying rocks and running in the mud. So you had to embrace the rough, tough nature of Philadelphia. But hidden in the corners was sophisticated technology for filming and tracking and evaluating where the players were at and how close were they to physical standards that would be deemed important for very high level play. So the new facility is wonderful, really cool.
How do you track what effect that then has on performance? Like, how can you say in a graph or data, hey, these new facilities have resulted in this?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. So the basketball games are a lot like flipping a coin. So if you have an evenly balanced coin, it's like having two teams that are really well matched up. And so if you just flip that coin 10 times and say, how many times do we get heads and how many times do we get tails? And if it's 50-50, that means it's a tie game and you go to overtime. And that the probability is about the odds of the shot falling. Every location on the court has a probability that if a certain player shoots from that spot, there's odds of whether that shot will go in. If it's a contested shot, the odds go down. If it's uncontested, the odds go up. And so what you do is you play a whole number of different games. And one game is the team running plays that allows them to take really good shots? And then conversely, are they running a defense that prevents the other team from taking really good shots? And so you can have one win there just by executing your game plan and saying, we took good shots, they took poor shots. And that's a game under the game of who won. So you could lose the game, but still play a decent game. The other games that are played are, from a fitness perspective, you can look at how people move in practices and you can organize your practices so they replicate the demands of the game. So if you can get a team to move very similar to the demands of the game, and they can do that more than 4 days a week, which is about the most you'd play in the NBA, sometimes 5 with doubleheaders, but it's usually 3 to 4 games a week. Then you can start to tell the coaches and the players that, look, we've had 4 weeks of practice that we've ramped up to, and the nature of those practices are structured so that your court transitions happen on the same cadence, and the breaks combined with the sprints and the defense and the offense, the physical demands of the direction change and accelerations and the jumps and the rebounds and the fighting. It's game specific, and you're handling more than we'd ever ask you to handle in a game. And you can do that 4 days a week, and you can do that for a month, and you don't feel overly fatigued, and you don't feel overly beat up, and you don't have defeat fatigue displaying itself, in the game where you start to have kind of half-assed defense. So the idea is it's a confidence boost for the coaches. Your team is now fit enough to play, and it's a confidence boost for the players as well, especially when they're rehabbing from injury.
Most teams adopt a similar philosophy, or is this something unique more to Philly?
I would think that there's a lot of Australians over there now. When I came over, Troy Flanagan got picked up with the Bucks, and Johan Billsborough was picked up with the Celtics and did some really good work there. He's now working with the Patriots. You had there was a group, Dave Taylor and Dean Little. They came over and worked with the Grizzlies and were doing some really good work. There was Lachlan Pinfold came over and worked with Golden State Warriors. So I was like, there was an Australian wave that crashed over the NBA with ideas that we'd all kind of picked up through our time in Australian sport. And I think you started to see a lot of people becoming more open for monitoring athletes, and you started to hear words like, we'd say things like load management, just like, it's no big deal, is it? Load management, which is basically just structured training, preparing for a game. But it became a really big deal. Journalists over here were like, we now have this thing called load management. Players are being kept out because of the load management. Scientists have gone crazy. Where, as you know, like load management's just a term that people pick up on. We just thought of it as structured training, just good old fashioned logical training. Don't overdo it or you'll get hurt, and don't underdo it or you're not fit enough. So we structure the training thoughtfully so that you're fit when it matters. And I thought it was interesting over here. That was deemed load management, Oh my God, the scientists are going crazy, with their technology. So I think that it might have been a little bit new early on, but there's been great basketball coaches in the NBA forever. Bright, smart, intuitive, great coaches that have an amazing feel for the game. There's been great athletic trainers, great strength conditioning coaches. I just think we kind of brought some newness of how the technology and the science kind of blends with the tradition.
How exciting was it to see that journey that the Sixers went on from like going through a rebuild to starting playing some good basketball and being talked about as a potential contender?
Yeah. No, it's I've never felt like I've been on grand tours, and what it's like when a tour team starts to unravel early on. You're not even in your second week, and like guys can barely walk. We've had 2 crashes. I've got one guy who's crying. It's like you kind of know when it's not going well. Man, when you lose, like over 2 weeks, you can lose like 8 to 10 games in a row. And it's just devastating. It's really hard. Coach Brown was amazing. He really focused on process and procedures and execution and the strategy and the player development. Those were they had to be your themes early on. Otherwise you'd lose the locker room. And much has been written about him and how amazing he was with what he did. But when they started winning, when Joel came back and he was good, and when Simmons came back and he was good, and for me, it was hard. I didn't know how good these players were going to be because I just saw them as injured athletes working to come back. But man, when you see the crowd up on their feet and you see how good some of these guys actually are, and then you see like 2, 3, 4 games in a row, and then you're barely winning 10 games in a season out of 82, and it goes to winning over 50 games, and you're just like, it's super exciting. It's fun being around winners, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and Joel went to the Tour de France. When was that? A couple of years ago. Is it true that the guys got to see All for One in the end?
So what happened is when All for One came out, I thought it was magical. So I showed it to a couple coaches. So a group of the coaches watched it. We never got it as like a sit down showing for all of the players. And some of the players would probably not even really know much about the Tour de France at all. Joel is a sport buff. You can read about it. He is, he loves his soccer. He's just really clever, and he knows a lot about, you'd love talking to him because he just knows so much about so many sports. And so he grew up from the French-speaking region of Cameroon. He's followed the Tour de France. He knows a lot of the riders' names. He knows the tactics, he plays like road cycling, video games. So there was a chance when he was going over, to see a stage at the Tour de France. And I can't remember now whether it was his agent. I think he expressed interest. And I said, I can see whether they could at least get you, a pass. We'll call up Shane Bannon and Matt White and Quaddy, and we'll see if they can get you in close at the Champs-Élysées stage. Be really fun for you. And he said he'd really like it. So we set it up, and I remember I got text messages back. I don't think Shane Bannon's ever seen a 7-foot male in his life. And Whitey said he barely fit in the car. That 7 foot's he's a big man. He's he doesn't look like it because he's super well proportioned, but it's a big human being. But he loved it. So yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Looking back at your time at the 76ers, you're proud of what you achieved and with what impact you had on those new facilities in particular?
Yeah, no, I think while I was there, we hired some really good staff. I think while we were there, we set up a really nice narrative, a really nice story. And I think the risk would have been me coming in and being, the science experiment. And I think I'm really happy the way we built in some succession planning. A lot of the people that, I hired while I was there are still there. And I think the way we layered in the technology, we did it in a way that suited the needs of the ownership group, and it wasn't overly intrusive for the coaches. And we spent a lot of time with the athletes saying, if you don't want to wear this, you don't have to, and we're here for you. And how we kind of sold it, I thought those nuances, I'm really, really proud of. And then I always feel like for me to leave a team and not to hate everybody is a good thing. There's a lot of relationships that break down in elite sport where people just have differences of opinion, and just like rock and roll bands, they all break up. And one thing I always really liked from Cycling Australia is, even though some people would move on to other things, there was still a camaraderie there. There was still a fraternity there that you felt part of. And I still talk to people within the Sixers, and they'll kick off on Monday against the Celtics, and when they play, I want them to win, and I want Joel to have a great game, and I want the players that were with the Sixers that have moved on to other teams. I love seeing them have a great career, and I love seeing them play really good basketball.
What do you think? Just lastly on the NBA, how the bubble situation's going? How do you think the NBA's handled the whole COVID pandemic?
I think what you can see within the NBA is what happens when you can pay good salaries and you can pick and work with really expensive but very good people, because a lot of sports just can't do what they just can't do financially. They could not do what the NBA did. But from all accounts, from what I hear in the press and from the little bits and pieces I hear, from people on the inside, it's just really impressive. They took it serious, and it's a value proposition. They're either going to do something that keeps COVID out, and they're going to hit it in a very, very vigorous way, and they're going to televise these games, and the fans are going to love the basketball and love the sound and love the look, and they're going to make a lot of money out of the television broadcasting rights. Or they're not going to get it right, and there's nothing, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of potential money. So I think what they did was good, but part of it is because of who they are. It's a very rich, very well-connected league.
What sort of long-term effects do you reckon COVID's going to have on these sporting codes? Because obviously the financial side of things, they've taken a fair bit of a hit. Will they have to reevaluate? Hang on, we can't pay the salaries that we used to. Will there be a bit of a restock take on the whole organization? Yeah,
it's a good question. I have a feeling that the rich will get richer, because they'll have the means and the resourcing and the connections with television and the fan base, that they'll be able to do things to keep the sport going. And I think the poor will get poorer. I think that the teams and the leagues that are just barely hanging in there. You and I have talked about it a lot. Like, cycling is going to be going through a hard time because, even on good years, it's hard to get those really juicy sponsors, and it's hard to pay the cyclists what they're worth, and it's hard. It's hard. So these sports that are right on the line of being profitable, I think they could get hit pretty hard. And you might see the sports that will be a time for opportunists to come in and think of new ways of packaging up the sport or revamping the league to try to make it safe for the athletes, but still satisfying for the fans. But the big sports, I think they have a lot of money. I think it will change, but you'll see solutions that the fans enjoy, because people are just going to keep on trying until they get it right. And I think for the first try, I think the NBA, I find myself, I know it's fake fan noise. I know that, and, everyone's doing their little things with the virtual backgrounds on the screen. And I know that, but I still look up and they're learning how to pan in on people, and the commentators are learning how to make it more colorful. And everybody's just trying to adapt. Humans are amazingly adaptable, but it's definitely, for a long time now, I don't think we're going to see it the way it was. I think, things are changing.
What about the future for you, Dave? Your current role now is similar but different. What are you hoping to achieve in this next chapter?
Yeah, so still very passionate and very interested in how the human body works, and so in the role I'm in right now, I get to work with some very they're very elite investors, very elite CEOs. They're involved in some big decision making here in Silicon Valley, which affects the US and the world. And they're unique individuals that want to be high performers. And so this idea of the company I'm working with now, Apeiron Life, it's about bringing this high performance support model into individuals who have a different type of stress in their life. They have to make really important decisions. They have to lead really big teams. They have to use their creativity with their intellect and try to make really good decisions at a very fast pace. And like elite sport, it's very, very competitive. And so the idea of trying to bring teams of people together to help individuals with their health, I really like. I think it's a really fun and exciting pursuit right now, especially how it engages with all the wearable technologies that are coming out. Apple's coming out with a new, watch. Garmin has some new tech. There's all kinds of interesting glucose monitoring. There's sleep monitoring with the Oura Ring. And so a lot of people are like, how do you use this technology and how do you use a support team to really make a difference for your overall health and health span and ability to perform at a super high level? So I like thinking about this. It's making me look at some very common themes from a different perspective. I do, in my role with Australia Catholic University, there's a lot of ex-Australian Institute of Sport scientists there. Louise Burke is a living legend, and she's down there. And her husband, John Hawley, is just a superstar, and Shone is there as well, and Stu Cormack and Dave Opar. They just have, Australia Catholic University has just attracted an all-star cast of scientists that are interested in sport. And so they let me scratch that itch on sport-related themes. I do think there's some really fun stuff to do in team sport. And so, I think I've got a really nice blend right now of trying to make sure I leave the door open for unique opportunities to consult and work with people, especially in high performance sport in Australia. But I also am really enjoying the networking over here and just these really, it is with elite athletes. It's the same with elite businessmen. You think that they're going to be arrogant and rude and, hard. But the ones that I'm meeting they're just incredible human beings. They're just smart and connected and passionate and intuitive and enthusiastic and curious. And they're really fun people to be around. So as long as we're around good people and I'm doing some high performance themes and I don't get COVID, I'm happy.
Well, it's been a bloody fascinating chat, mate. I always love the times that we had over the years and just talking about general life and things like that. But I always want to leave listeners with what are some of the key things that you've learned in your journey, Dave, that you can pass on, if it's an athlete, if it's someone in everyday life, keys to success, mate, and getting the most out of yourself.
Now, I think, Job's probably said it in the most popular way, but do stuff that you love and surround yourself with great people. And if you're around people that you don't think are great, and don't be confused with someone that doesn't agree with you as someone you shouldn't like, because you can have people that don't agree with you that are just great people and they just don't agree with you, make you stronger. But if you love the topics and the projects you're doing and you got great people around you, then you just need to make sure you find a little bit of balance to keep yourself sane, because even in a chocolate shop, it's all good. You can eat too much chocolate and get sick. So you try to find a little bit of balance, you get great people around you, and you keep going after projects that you love. And don't get too bummed out when bad things happen, because sun usually comes up tomorrow and you get to try again. So I'd say probably, those two things in particular, love what you're doing and try to be around great people.
Well, that's a great way to finish, mate. Great message there. And as I said, it's been great catching up, and you're no doubt going to be a huge success in this next chapter, mate. So I wish you all the best, and definitely don't get COVID. Stay safe, Mark. Wash your mitts.
No, and we'll have to, next time I find a court that's open, we'll get you over and work on that layup of yours. Yeah.
I've started playing basketball here in Geelong, mate, and let's just say I've got a long way to go, particularly with the fitness. So I might need to write up a program for me.
You got to finish for me with two questions. Who's your pick for the NBA playoffs?
Oh yeah, righto.
And are you a Sixers fan?
So I guess 76ers are going to win it, and Embiid going to be MVP.
I'd love that one. If that happens, we'll get on a Zoom call. We'll have a beer together.
Yeah, definitely, mate. But yeah, now, as I said, awesome chat, and I'm sure the listeners will get a fair bit out of that one. So fantastic to speak to you again, Dave.
Great to catch up, Dan. Always good to talk to you.
See you, mate.
All right. Bye-bye.